All right. If we can get started, please. I know there are a few people still coming in and a few still getting pizza. That's fine. Go ahead and help yourselves, and then. But we need to get started so we won't run out of time. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the 4th annual Words That Change History Day, sponsored by the QEP. I'll get to that in just a minute. I'm Dr. Gilchrist White, Director of the QEP and Professor of English, and I would like to introduce my committee members that help make this event successful. First off, we have Dr. Gary Wilson, Professor of History, and he is our chairperson of the committee. Taj Cornelius, who is Director of Student Life, Rebecca Sauer, who is Marketing and Communications, and Julie Garcia, Professor of Speech. And they are the ones who help make this successful. I also need to thank Brad Dennison and Zach McWilliams, who are on the cameras and sound. They are also vital parts. I couldn't do it without them either. And so without further ado, let me just mention just a minute about what the QEP is. Many of you all probably weren't here when we first started this 4 years ago. The QEP is our Quality Enhancement Plan, is part of our accreditation with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. Without it, we don't get federal funding for scholarships and federal monies, loans, that sort of thing, and all sorts of other benefits. And so our accreditation is very important, and the QEP is part of that accreditation that focuses on some sort of student learning. And our QEP that started, this is the 4th year of implementation, that started 4 years ago, is oral communication across the curriculum. And it is our intention to begin when we first started was to improve students' ability to communicate orally, whether it be in a group setting like this, and ironically I'm very nervous, or if it's one-on-one, for example, for a job interview. And so far our data is showing that we are making an impact on your learning, and I'm sure many of you have already given or will give presentations in many of your classes as you move through your core curriculum and workforce programs. One aspect of the QEP, and my personal favorite, is this event today, the Words That Change History Day event. It really showcases important speeches from the past, and it demonstrates the importance of words, not just on a regional or national or global scale, but on a personal level as well. And since we've been doing this, we have had speeches as old as the first Queen Elizabeth from the 16th century, all the way up to very modern speeches, and we will hear 4 today from, I would say, mid-20th century. The Words That Change History event invites students like you all to choose a speech from history, and there is a list that you can choose from, and to apply to give it at this event. Those students who apply then audition before the QEP Student Events Committee that I introduced at the beginning. And if you are chosen, then you will present in November. The event is always in November in the fall. If you are here next fall, and I hope some of you will be, whether you just started your program, you probably will be, but I hope you will consider applying for this event. It's a lot of fun. As you can see, a lot of students come, and I like it. I enjoy it a lot. We have another event that's held in the spring called the Student Speaker Showcase. And students who give exemplary speeches in their classes or oral presentations, doesn't have to be a speech class, are then recommended by their instructors to re-give their speech, if you will, in the spring. And so if you give an oral presentation this fall or early in the spring semester, and your instructor asks if you would be willing to participate in the Student Speaker Showcase, please consider it. We would love to have you re-give a speech or a presentation that your instructors have recommended as exemplary. Before I introduce the speakers today, I have a few reminders, and these are standard. You probably already know them by heart. First off, please turn off your cell phones and no recording of the event. We're already doing that, and the pictures will be up on the website. I don't know when, Rebecca, but she's going to be taking photographs, and they will be up in the next few days. We also have, of course, pizza and drinks available, and please feel free to help yourself. But after the speakers begin, please stay seated. If you have to leave, please do so quietly so as not to disturb anyone. Yes, sir?
Till what time will this event last till?
1:20.
1:20?
Yes. We'll be out in time for your 1:30 classes. And again, please be sure you signed in with your instructors' names, especially if you are getting extra credit. I will email those out to the instructors' names listed on the sign-in sheets. Let me think. After the four speakers have finished, there will be a brief presentation of awards, and there's also an evaluation that I hope you got as you came in. Please feel free to, but please complete it, and also just turn it in. You can leave it on the table at the end of the program, and I would really appreciate if you would do that. All right, now for our program. Today, we have four of your colleagues presenting speeches, as I said, from the mid-20th century. I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then they, in turn, will get up and give their speech, giving you a little bit of background about it. Our first speaker is Adam Albarado. Our second speaker is Christian Alvarado. Third is Eusebio Alvarez. And finally, Isabella Delgado. So, without further ado, Adam.
Good afternoon. I'm Adam Albarado, and I'll be orating Douglas MacArthur's speech given to Congress April 19th, 1951. For those of you who do not know Douglas MacArthur, he was a general who commanded the Southwest Pacific during World War II, oversaw successful Allied occupation and reform for post-war Japan, and led the United Nations forces during the Korean War. I address you with neither rancor nor bitterness in the fading twilight of life, but with one purpose in mind: to serve my country. The communist threat is a global one. Its successful advance in one sector threatens the destruction of every other sector. You cannot appease or otherwise surrender to communism in Asia without simultaneously undermining our efforts to halt its advance in Europe. The peoples of Asia, mustering half of the Earth's population and 60% of its natural resources, these peoples are rapidly consolidating a new force, both moral and material, with which to raise the living standard and erect adaptations of the design of modern progress to their own distinct cultural environments. What they seek now is friendly guidance, understanding, support, not imperious direction, the dignity of equality, and not the shame of subjugation. Their pre-war standard of life, pitifully low, is indefinitely lower now in the devastation left in war's wake. World ideologies play little part in Asian thinking and are little understood. What the people strive for is the opportunity for a little more food in their stomachs, a little better clothing on their backs, a little firmer roof over their heads, and the realization for the normal nationalist urge for political freedom. Since the war, the Japanese people have undergone the greatest reformation recorded in modern history. With a commendable will, eagerness to learn, and a marked capacity to understand, they have, from the ashes left in war's wake, erected in Japan an edifice dedicated to the supremacy of individual liberty and personal dignity. And in the ensuing process, there has been created a truly representative government committed to the advance of political morality, freedom of economic enterprise, and social justice. While I was not consulted prior to the President's decision to intervene in support of the Republic of Korea, that decision from a military standpoint proved a sound one, as we hurled back the invader and decimated his forces. Our victory was complete and our objectives within reach when Red China intervened with superically numerical numbers. This created a new war and an entirely new situation, a situation not contemplated when our forces were committed against the North Korean invaders. I called for reinforcements, but was informed that reinforcements were not available. I made clear that if not permitted to destroy the enemy built-up bases north of Yalao, if not permitted to utilize the friendly Chinese force on Formosa, if not permitted to blockade the China coast to prevent the Chinese Reds from getting succor from without, and if there were no hope of major reinforcements, the position of the command from a military standpoint forbade victory. Efforts have been made to distort my position. It has been said, in effect, that I was a warmonger. Nothing could be further from the truth. I know war as few other men now living know it, and nothing to me is more revolting. I have long advocated its complete abolition as its very destructiveness on both friend and foe has rendered it useless as a means of settling international disputes. But once war is forced upon us, there is no other alternative than to apply every available means to bring it to a swift end. War's very object is victory, not prolonged indecision. In war, there is no substitute for victory. Of the nations of the world, Korea alone, up to now, is the sole one which had risked it all against communism. The magnificence of the courage and fortitude of the Korean people defies description. They have chosen to risk death rather than slavery. They have met all tests there, and I can report to you without reservation that they are splendid in every way. It was my constant effort to preserve them and end this savage conflict honorably and with the least loss amount of time and minimal sacrifice of life. Its growing bloodshed has caused me the deepest anguish and anxiety. Those gallant men will remain often in my thoughts and in my prayers always. When I joined the Army, even before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plain at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished. But I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barrack ballads of the day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I will be reciting John Fitzgerald Kennedy's inaugural address. He performed this January 20th, 1961, after he was sworn into office. Vice President Johnson, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, President Truman, Reverend clergy, fellow citizens. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as the beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of state, but from the hands of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slowing doing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed, and to which we are committed at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge, and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in the host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect them supporting our view, but we shall always hope them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required, not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of the border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas. And let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the power of its own house. To that world of assembly of sovereign states, the United Nations, our last hope in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a form for incentive, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Finally, to those nations who make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew for the quest for peace, before the dark powers of destruction unleashed by science engulf all of humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. We dare not tempt them with weakness, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our own present course, both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed by the steady spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter the uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So let us begin anew, remembering that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belittling those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate diseases, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah, undo the heavy burdens, let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just, the weak secure, and the peace preserved. All of this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet, but let us begin. In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our course. Since this country was founded, each generation of Americans has been summoned to give testimony to its national loyalty. The graves of young Americans who answer the call to service surround the globe. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of men, tyranny, poverty, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that we can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join me in this historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us will exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from the fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And my fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history, the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth and lead the land we love. His blessing, asking His blessing and His help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eusedio Alvarez, and today I will be reading I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. I'm pretty sure everyone knows who he is, but if you don't, he was a civil rights activist. He was also a reverend, and in 1963, August 8th, he gave his famous speech, I Have a Dream. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon of light to hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seamed in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to an end of a long night, their captivity, but 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the mantles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So, we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall here. This note was a promise to all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be granted an unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on their promissory note. And so far as their citizens of color are concerned, instead of honoring their sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked as insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that that bank of justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in a great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches and freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to the hallowed spot of Remain America, of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or taking the tranquility drug of gratuitism. Now, is that the time to make real the promise of democracy? Now, is the time to raise the dark and desolate valley of segregation to a unit path of racial injustice? Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of this moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until the ingoing autumn of freedom and equality. In 1963 is not the end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted citizenship and rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation. The bright days of injustice will emerge. And that is something I must say to people who stand on a worn threshold which leads into palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy on thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct ourselves on a high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to disintegrate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soulful force. The marvelous new military which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust white men or white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to a realization that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to the realization that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must take the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of an unspeakable horror of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies heavy with the fatigue of travel cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We cannot be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing to which vote for. No one. We are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteous like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you here, out of great trials and tribulation, some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas which your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of prosecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our nation, of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit together at a table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering in the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governing having its lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right in Alabama, little black boys and girls and little white boys and girls will play as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. That one day every valley shall be exalted, Every hill and mountain shall be lowered. Rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is our faith. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will go back to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that one day we will be free. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the highering allegiances of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow caps of the Rockies in Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain in Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain in Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill in Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. When we allow to let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every city, every hamlet, from every state to every city, we will be able to speed up that day when we all are God's children. Black men, white men, Jews, Gentiles, Protestants, and Catholics. We will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spirituals. Free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Given on June 12, 1987, by Ronald Reagan, Tear Down This Wall is an empowering speech encouraging Berliners to destroy a wall that divided their country and turned countrymen upon each other. Chancellor Kohl, Governing Mayor Deipchen, ladies and gentlemen, 24 years ago, President John F. Kennedy visited Berlin, speaking to the people of this city and the world at the City Hall. Well, since then, 2 other presidents have come, each in his turn, to Berlin. And today, I myself make my second visit to your city. We come to Berlin, we American presidents, because it's our duty to speak in this place of freedom. But I must confess, we're drawn here by other things as well. By the feeling of history in this city, more than 500 years older than our own. By the beauty of the Grunwald and the Tiergarten, but most of all, by your courage and determination. Perhaps the composer Paul Linke knew something about American presidents. You see, like so many presidents before me, I come here today because wherever I go, whatever I do, ich hab noch einen Koffer in Berlin. I still have a suitcase in Berlin. Our gathering today is being broadcast throughout Western Europe and North America. I understand that it is being heard and seen as well in the East. To those listening throughout Eastern Europe, a special word. Although I cannot be with you, I address my remarks to you just as surely as to those standing here before me. For I join you, as I join your fellow countrymen in the West, in this firm, this unalterable belief, es gibt nein in Berlin. There is only one Berlin. Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. From the Baltic south, these barriers cut across Germany in a gash of barbed wire, concrete, dog runs, and guard towers. Farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same. Still, a restriction on the right to travel, still an instrument to impose upon ordinary men and women the will of a totalitarian state. Yet, it is here in Berlin where the wall emerges most clearly. Here, cutting across your city, where the news photo and the television screen have imprinted this brutal division of a continent upon the entire mind of the world. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is a German, separated from his fellow men. Every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. President von Weizsäcker has said, the German question is open as long as the Brandenburg Gate is closed. Today I say, as long as the gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. Yet, I do not come here to lament, for I find in Berlin a message of hope, even in the shadow of this wall, a message of triumph. In this season of spring in 1945, the people of Berlin emerged from their air raid shelters to find devastation. Thousands of miles away, the people of the United States reached out to help. And in 1947, Secretary of State, as you've been told, George Marshall announced the creation of what would become known as the Marshall Plan. Speaking precisely 40 years ago this month, he said, "Our policy is directed not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos." In the Reichstag a few moments ago, I saw a display commemorating this 40th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. I was struck by the sign on a burnt-out, gutted structure that was being rebuilt. I understand that Berliners of my own generation can remember seeing signs like it dotted throughout the city. The sign read simply, "The Marshall Plan is helping here to strengthen the free world." A strong free world in the West, that dream became real. Japan rose from ruin to become an economic giant. Italy, France, Belgium, virtually every nation in Western Europe saw political and economic rebirth. The European community was founded. In West Germany and here in Berlin, there took place an economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. Auenar, Erhard Rauter, and other leaders understood the political importance of liberty. That just as truth can flourish only when the journalist is given freedom of speech, so prosperity can come about only when the farmer and businessman enjoy economic freedom. The German leaders reduced tariffs, expanded free trade, and lowered taxes. From 1950 to 1960 alone, the standard of living in Germany and Berlin has doubled. Where 4 decades ago there was rubble, today in West Berlin is the greatest industrial output of any city in Germany. busy office blocks, fine homes and apartments, proud avenues, and the spreading lawns of parkland. Where a city's culture seemed to have been destroyed, today there are two great universities, orchestras, and an opera, countless theaters and museums. Where there was want, today there's abundance. From devastation, from utter ruin, you Berliners have, in freedom, rebuilt a city that once again ranks as the greatest on earth. The Soviets may have had other plans, but my friends, there were a few things the Soviets didn't count on. Berliner Harz, Berliner Humor, and Berliner Schnauz. In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health, even want of the most basic kind, too little food. After these 4 decades, then, there stands before the entire world one great and inescapable conclusion: freedom leads to prosperity. Freedom replaces the ancient hatreds among the nations with comity and peace. Freedom is the victor. And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state? Or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West, or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Thank you.
Thank you all for giving us some really inspiring words. Thank you all for attending. I have some certificates to award to our presenters, if you all will come forward.